Welcome to Wild Soul Gathering. I'm Dr. Sandra Marie, and I'll be your host for this episode of Happy Hour for the Spiritually Curious. Hello to all you wild souls out there. I want to send a special thank you to each and every one of you for taking time out of your day to join and listen to our guests as we discuss the many aspects of spirituality. To stay updated on our latest releases, please follow us, share with friends who may be interested, and if you feel so moved, a kind rating and review is always appreciated. In the tradition of happy hour, cheers to some new insights, peace, revitalization, and perhaps an aha moment that may change your life. Welcome to Wild Gathering. I'm Dr. Sandra Marie, and I'm going to be your host for this episode of Happy Hour for the Spiritually Curious. Today, I am gifted to have on the show Victoria Shaw. She is an intuitive. Victoria is also an author, teacher, coaches, and mentors folks along their journey. And she also has her own podcast on spirituality using her intuitive skills. Welcome to the show, Victoria.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So just to give the listeners a little background, you and I met on a trip to Egypt, which ended up being very mystical and magical for many of us, and actually I think changed many of our lives on a different trajectory. And it always amazes me when I reconnect with people years later that although most of us didn't know each other on the trip, we all had mystical magicalness changed our lives.
Absolutely. I often say I got on the plane one person and I flew home somebody else. It was a truly transformative experience. And for me, too, it was one of those moments in my life where I really listened to my intuition really deeply to do something that for me was entirely out of my comfort zone. Just to give context, when we traveled in 2019, Egypt was just opening up again for tourism after some really rough political years. And I don't know if you know this, Sandra, but there were several people that bailed at the last minute and didn't actually get on that trip with us because they chickened out at the last minute. And I was one of those people that was wavering up until the 11th hour because that trip was so outside of my comfort zone. But I also have to say, when I got the call to go to Egypt, it was so clear, it was so strong, and it was something I knew I had to do. It was something I knew I had to do. And it's, taking that trip and having the experience that I did there and afterwards has really been, it took me to another level of how I live my life and my trust and faith in my intuition, because now I know what it feels like. And I was following it before, but oh my gosh, now I hear the call and I know it's golden and I listen.
Beautiful. I didn't have the fears. I was actually living in the Middle East at that time. So that was my life, but it was still out of my comfort zone because I traveled alone and I didn't know anyone. Being a little bit of an introvert, that was an uncomfortableness. But as you said, I was so pulled to do it and I knew I absolutely had to do it that I just couldn't let go of it. To start with, I would like to, if you don't mind, talk a little bit about your spiritual journey. So you mentioned, as I've heard so many other people mention, that you feel like you've lived two lives. The journey, however it is that you frame it in your world, and then you have the life that you have now where you have really grown your intuitive skills, your mediumship, and you're using it to make such a difference in other people's lives and to elevate the energy of the planet. Would you be willing to share a little bit about what that spiritual journey looked like for you?
Of course. And, I often say I've lived about 12 lives in this body, maybe 20 by now. So it's a constant evolution and it's a constant shift and change, which I think it is for many of us. And for me, I feel like I've really been on an accelerated course because, every couple of months I'm someone new. But the big shift for me early on was a little over a decade ago, maybe like 15, 16. I don't know. I'm getting old. So a while ago, right around, my mid 30s, right before my 40th birthday, somewhere in that range. I really did have a bit of an awakening. What had happened was I was originally trained as a research psychologist. For my whole life, I've been fascinated by, the mind and the brain and the mind-body connection and these big, what I now kind of recognize are spiritual questions, but at the time I thought of them as philosophical questions. What is consciousness, right? And this, was something that would really, in a good way, keep me up at night. Because of that, I pursued a PhD in psychology from a fancy university and studied reasoning and memory and development. When I got to the end of that journey, my passion was gone. I realized now that my passion was gone because those big spiritual questions, which I didn't know were missing in my life because I didn't really have any spiritual framework as a child. Those big spiritual questions were just not things that people were looking at in academic psychology. They weren't things that you could look at in the lab. And so I lost interest, and I was at a level where if I wasn't passionate, there was no reason to be doing it because it was a very high level, and to succeed at that level would have taken over my whole life. So I took some time off to raise my family. There was just this feeling, that wouldn't go away. And I think many people have this feeling. I knew there was something I was supposed to be doing. I didn't know what it was. It was persistent. It was there. And I would try different things. I wrote a bunch of self-help books. I tried a lot of different things. And even though I had some success at some of those, nothing was landing. I wasn't feeling that click of this is what I'm supposed to do. But something else that happened at this time is my kids were struggling. I had this very out-of-the-box pediatrician who would send me to all of these weirdo alternative out-of-the-box healers. And it started off, like acupuncture, which was out of the box for me, and cranial sacral therapy, and then medical intuitives and, energy healers. And I started to learn about this whole world that I didn't even know existed. And they all kept saying, Victoria, Victoria, like, you're so intuitive. You're so intuitive. You're one of us. What are you going to do with it? It took a few years, but eventually I listened and I made the, intention to awaken my own intuition. I started some psychic development classes and I did some things. And from the moment I took that step, everything shifted, everything changed. It was quick. It was fast. And my life took a turn for the better and I've never looked back. I've learned that we all have intuition. We all are mediums. We all can activate these gifts to varying degrees. But for me, I had it since I was a child. I've been using it since I was a child, but I didn't know what I was doing. And also for me, my psychic signals were turned up so high that I was also often picking up a lot of stuff that I had no business tuning into. So for me, a lot of the journey was learning how to turn down some channels, focus my intention and attention on the gold, on the real high connected, this is my soul speaking to me kind of stuff. Then as soon as I started doing that, my guidance was very clear about the next steps for my helping journey and my professional journey. And so for me, listening to my intuition was about becoming a professional counselor, which I am licensed as a professional counselor in the state of Connecticut. But also what I love to do first and foremost is offer intuitive guidance. And that's what I do.
Wow, Victoria, that's quite a story. When you talk about your intuition and being intuitive, can you just give some basic broad strokes about what exactly is that?
Intuition is something that we all have, and it's that knowing, right? And it can come in many different forms in many different ways, but it's when you know something, not with your brain, not with your mind, not something that you've been taught or learned or conditioned to know, but you know something often deep in your bones. You don't know how you know it, and it's correct. It can be a felt sense in your body, like a gut feeling or the chills. Or for me, when we took that Egypt trip, it was just this full body, like, I got to do this. Like it was just something was propelling me there, even though I was like, I'm not really sure I want to go. It can also be a calm, wise voice in our head. It can be a full body sense of knowing. That's one of my predominant ones. Some people get visions. They see things. They see images. Some people even have these psychic experiences where they see things in the outside world, right? They might see auras or see energy. That is not a gift that I have. It can be very subtle. It can be very strong, but everybody has it. In my estimation, rather, we're all spiritual beings and we're having a human experience. Okay. But first and foremost, you're a spiritual being. And when you come to earth, you often agree to forget all the good stuff that your soul knows. You forget even that you are a spiritual being and you forget your spiritual nature, right? But there's a part of you that never forgets. And your intuition is the part of you that's connected to that. Okay. And that's how I see it. And there's lots of different ways that we all have this knowing that goes beyond our five senses. Some of it is super duper inspired from, spirit, and some of it is just, again, feeling into the energies of the earth. And so it's good to have some discernment about which channel you're tuned into. But at the end of the day, everything's energy. We're all spiritual beings and we all have this multisensory awareness. It's just a matter of we've been taught not to pay attention to it. And so we often, when we use it, we often don't use it intentionally. And oftentimes too, when we use it, we talk ourselves out of it.
That we do. It really is an interesting game that we've come down to earth to play. And it's interesting when you look back for eons, man has searched for spirit and meaning from the beginning. That's part of the journey as we come down here without knowing it's inside of us and we're on that path to connect with it. And it looks so different for so many different people.
Absolutely.
What does a spiritual development class look like? You mentioned you took some classes that led to a massive shift in your life. Can you talk a little bit about what these classes look like?
I took a series of intuition development classes, or psychic development classes. So classes that were designed specifically to tap you into your intuition. And some of them were very helpful. They were all very helpful in their own special ways. I teach very differently now than many of them. For me, it was, and I teach this when I teach people to connect with their intuition. The first step is setting that intention. Because once you set the intention is really, really, really powerful. And we are, attractors, and we attract into our space what we desire. And so once you set that intention, you will set everything in motion for your intuition, for the steps that you need to take to awaken your intuition. And that's how it was with me. And it was very, very, very fast in my case, because that intention, I do believe, was aligned with what my soul was really wanting to do. But I think intuition development is to some extent spiritual development, because again, if you're doing it right, there's many different teachers out there teaching different things. But the way that I teach, intuition is that connection with your soul. It's the connection with your spirit. It's how to live in alignment with your highest and truest self. So when you're doing that, it's spiritual development as well. I sometimes don't use the term spiritual development because, look, I think we're all spiritual. I did a whole episode years ago on my podcast, Are You Spiritual? And the answer is yes. Whether you know it or not, whether you like to read spiritual books and listen to spiritual podcasts, which probably you do if you're listening to this conversation right now. If you don't, you're inescapably spiritual. You're a spirit having a human experience. What I teach, and I think what most of the best quote unquote spiritual teachers teach, is how to bridge that connection between your true self and your human self. And, both are equally valid. You are here to be human, my friends. And so it's around being human to the best of your abilities, and also not getting lost in all the lower bandwidth uncomfortableness of humanity more than you need to, more than you have to. Bringing more light to the puzzle and to the equation.
That's very well said. So you're teaching classes now. Do you do these in person, or are they online, or a little bit of a hybrid there?
I do a lot of different things. I teach all over. I teach live classes wherever I'm invited to teach all over the planet. I do online classes, which I love. And I've done a lot more of that, like as many of us have through the pandemic. And also because I just relocated my office all the way from one coast to the other. I have friends everywhere now. And then I also have a retreat property here in San Diego in Escondido, California, where we do retreats. And so I do a lot of teaching there. And I'm finding that I love getting people out of their element and into that sacred space, because it's amazing to see the growth that happens when we're willing to just, take that little hiatus and take that step out of the everyday, do this retreat experience. And that's probably similar to the experience that we had in Egypt too. I think sometimes when you get out of your everyday habitual surroundings, it gives you a chance to break up those old patterns and step out of that box of who you used to think that you were, and really start to see yourself and experience yourself in a broader context. The retreats have just been a blast, and I'm so excited to open this chapter of my teaching in my life.
And when does your retreat center open?
It opens officially January 2023. We're already kind of open. We've already started, and we have all sorts of fun stuff scheduled all the way through the year of 2023. And then we also do individualized retreats, which is one of my favorite things. If you have a group of friends, or even if you want to come alone or with a partner, we will put together an individualized experience for you, which is really, really fun and something that you don't get everywhere.
That is awesome. When we were catching up, it was fascinating to me, because the retreat experiences and what you're doing is exactly what I'm looking to create with Wild Souls Gathering. And I bought this farm in the foothills of the Appalachian, Southern Ohio, and now I'm in the process of getting that all together. And as we talked, you had mentioned that there was someone else from the trip that you had met that is also in the process of doing a very similar thing with a property in Colorado. And I thought, wow, it was really fascinating, just again, with the magical and mysticalness of that trip and how it really changed our lives, that there are so many of us that are actively in the process of putting together physical spaces as a venue, as well as put the programming together.
Absolutely.
It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. So if someone's interested in doing this with you, how would they get a hold of you?
Our website is cactusblossomretreat.com. So you can find us there. And you can also find me through my website, which is victoriashawintuitive.com. Either way, you just hit that little contact button and ask us all about it. If we have a class or something that's not full yet, and there'll be information of how to sign up right there on the website. But really the best way is to call me because we are brand new and not all of the opportunities are up there yet, but we're getting there.
Nice Cactus Blossom retreat. It makes my heart smile. So there's just something energy with that. So you also have a podcast. Tell me a little bit about your podcast, your favorite episodes, and you really have your format all over the place. I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
You do interviews, you do solo kinds of things.
My podcast is such a joy because it's an opportunity for me to get out of the way, hear my guidance, and just talk. And that's like my favorite thing to do when I'm having a rough day. I'm like, I'm going to go record an episode. I always feel so much better when I do. So yeah, we do 3 things on the show. The podcast itself was intuitively guided. I sat down in the early fall, late summer of 2019 and took a weekend off to start my book. I was like, it's time for me to write this book. I've been dreaming of writing popular psychology, personal development, and now I would say spiritual development book since I was in middle school. I always felt like that was my life calling. That's one of the reasons I went to pursue my PhD in psychology, because I thought that would lead to my self-help book career. But I've been doing some other stuff along the way. So I was like, I've been doing this for over a decade. The time is right. I'm going to take this weekend off. I'm going to write my book. Sitting in a hotel room on the beautiful beach of Rhode Island, and nothing's coming through. Nothing. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to go for a walk on the beach because here I am. And I took out my little voice recorder and I started talking, and all of this information was coming through to the voice recorder. And I thought to myself, okay, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to transcribe this and write the book. And that didn't really fly either. At the same time, I had started guesting on a bunch of other people's podcasts, and I was like really enjoying it. So I realized, as always, that spirit was nudging me away from, doing what I thought I was supposed to do towards something else. So we launched the podcast in March of 2020. So we've been at it, almost 3 years. It'll be 3 years in March. It's a journey that continues to evolve, and I wouldn't change it for anything. And on the show, we do 3 things. First of all, I do solo episodes where I'll usually tune into a topic that interests me. And now more and more as we have a broader listenership, oftentimes listeners will ask me questions as well. And those are super fun to answer on the show. And I will tune into my guidance and see what comes through. And then we also do interviews like we're doing now, which is also, as you probably know, a joy because I've gotten to connect to some of my greatest teachers, people whose books I've read and just loved. I've met people whose books I hadn't read until they were on my show, and then I love them. And I've made actually one of my newest best friends I made through the podcast. It's just such a joy. And it's also fun for my listeners because they get to hear these great conversations. And then the third thing that we do on the show is I do intuitive readings. That's where you get your chance to learn through other people's stories. And I set them up pretty much the way I would do a session for a client. I'm a little sanitized because although we do it anonymously, I like to protect people's privacy. We don't always go in quite as deep as I might sometimes do in like more of an intuitive counseling setting, although sometimes we do. But it does give you a sense of what it's like to have a reading. But it also, we get our answers through other people's stories. So often someone will tell me like, wow, I listened to that interview with Angela and gosh, that sounded so much like me. I learned so much and I really got my answers there too. That's what we do.
I love it. That's a lot of the path that Happy Hour for the Spiritually Curious is going down, is really putting other people's stories out there and sharing them so that people can relate and really recognize that everyone's story is unique to them. There's a lot of opportunity, tools, ways to climb the mountain, so to speak, to get to the top. And there's no right and there's no wrong. It's whatever's out there. So what speaks to you, if it piques your curiosity, worth a phone call. Otherwise, honestly, they're not really sure what's out there. And the other thing that I have noticed is that it seems to be some hesitancy still at this point in time around the term spirituality. So a lot of people are curious or they want to explore. And although in our worlds, it's very commonplace and we don't think twice about it, in other people's lives, it's still a little bit of a taboo thing and may not be so comfortable. So I love that you as well as I put these messages out there that are safe spaces for people to be able to come up and explore too.
Yeah. And I've been in this world now for so long that I've kind of forgotten that spiritual means different things to different people. I started online dating as I start to talk about my journey because it's first and foremost to who I am. I realized that for some people, they're like, is she in a cult? Is she like born again? Not, I'm not a fan of cults, but again, wherever you find your path is a beautiful place for you to begin and to be. I'm realizing, I'm like, should I use the word metaphysical? Like, should I use something else? But I'm sticking with spiritual because it resonates with me.
I think that could end up being your book.
Maybe.
That could be some fun stories to share.
Yeah. It may very well be. We shall see what evolves.
We have an idea many times of what we think it's supposed to be. You talked about middle school. I had things from elementary school that I was sure was my path and what was to be, only to discover that the path took a lot of little zigzags here and it really was quite different. The core crux of what I thought it was going to be is there. It just looks very different than what I had created in my mind.
Yeah, but oftentimes, that's such a good point because oftentimes we don't have the frame of reference to know these things or to interpret these things. And that's why, people who will come for an intuitive reading, they often want the whole answer. Right. And even if you're just coming to your own higher guidance, right, we often expect the whole answer at once. And our intuition can't possibly work that way because life is a lived experience. And, we don't always have the frame of reference for the entire answer. You have to walk on the path. And so, I saw myself writing self-help books because that's all I knew. What I do now and what I plan to do now is actually pretty similar than what I dreamed of doing. I just, I didn't know what it was called. I didn't have the, the full colors to paint the tableau at that point of time. And even a few years back, I was given the date of 2023 as the year I was going to lead a retreat back to Egypt because I was so moved by that experience that I wanted to bring others. It's not going to happen this year, guys. My plate is very, very full, but 2023 is in fact the year that I've opened a spiritual retreat center. So, and Isis is sitting there over my fireplace in the main meeting rooms. Sometimes we just get part of the story and that's okay too. And also things change. We have a path, but that path isn't set in the stone the way your mind, looks at a map and says, I need to get to Florida. Here are the steps. Because that map is changing all the time, depending on where you go, what you do, what you focus your attention on, how your interest and your desires change, how the world changes, how other people change. It's a puzzle that is constantly in flux. And so it's unrealistic to think that first grade or eighth grade self is going to have all the answers for the rest of your life. It can't because it's constantly evolving.
I agree. And the other piece of it, and you had mentioned it earlier in the podcast, is we are here to experience the human part of the spiritual human experience. Like you can't just buy all of that for the spiritual part of it, which really makes things a little dicey and actually pretty exciting at times.
Yeah. And I think joyous. And I think part of the journey is learning to love the human part too. That's actually what we're here to do. And your spiritual knowing can help remind you of who and what you really are. It's almost like that interpenetrates that humanity and lifts it up. And that's what we're here to do. There's no mistakes. There's no wrong turns. There's nothing wrong with anything. We all come from the same stuff. We are all starlight. It's just a matter of seeing and feeling and living that more and more.
Yep, absolutely. In your present self, I know that your future self is thinking about taking a trip of people to Egypt to experience their own mystical event. Do you have any other things that you have planned for the future?
Yeah. I don't know if we'll ever get to that or not. I hope we will. But like I said, my plate is so full now with Cactus Blossom and the podcast and all the stuff I'm doing. I am so deeply happy to take it one step at a time. I wouldn't be here in California, I can say, and I wouldn't have started Cactus Blossom if I hadn't gone to Egypt. Really true. But I was actually traveling in Greece for my 50th birthday. Last day in Greece, we were in Crete and at the museum in Crete where they have a lot of Egyptian artifacts because Crete is actually just right across an ocean from Egypt. And there was a lot of back and forth. And I remember having a vision, having a thought, I'm going to Egypt next. And, I was like, okay, whatever. Didn't really think about it. I came home the next day in all of my jet lag, and there was a email in my inbox from a person called Sarah Wiseman, who we both were on the trip with, who I didn't know. I don't even know how I got on her mailing list. I think I saw something that she did and liked something, totally random, but I wasn't familiar with her work. I didn't really know much about her, but I got on that list and she said, "Hey, I'm going to Egypt. Want to come?" You know, it was a promotional thing because like I didn't know her, but she had been invited to be a presenter on that trip. And I knew I was going to go. And I remember thinking like, I better like just sign up today while I'm all jet lagged before I chicken out. Because I knew it was so far of my comfort zone. But for me personally, the fact that I acted on that impulse for that trip, it set me up for now. When my intuition calls, I listen. I don't always know what it's going to say. It says, buy a retreat center. I'm like, okay, I'll buy a retreat center. And, you know, I've learned that when I listen, the results are pretty darn good. It's been really fun. But I also think it highlights the point for all of you. You don't have to go on a major trip or move cross country or buy big pieces of land in California if you don't want to. Listen to your intuition. It can be very small and very subtle. It does not have to be these big life-changing things. But whatever it is, the more we listen, the more we connect with the magic in life. The easier and the flow and the way things have lined up for this move, but also for this property, they've been amazing. And I take no credit other than just showing up and listening.
That's an incredible story. I have to share with you how I got into this Egypt trip was I received an email in my mailbox from Sarah Weissman. I opened it up and I was like, this is something that I feel like I'm supposed to do and I need to do. I interviewed Soni Singh, who was on the trip also, I believe by herself. You know, she's written all those books since was her transformative thing there. And when we were talking on the podcast, she goes, I didn't realize that you had went alone. I actually got there through Sarah Weissman. So I have to laugh because now you are telling the exact same story that Soni shared with me and that I shared with her. So yeah, so the universe really has brought us together through this woman that none of us really knew. I have to reflect a bit on that one.
That's funny. Yeah. And we were all three traveling alone too, which is pretty funny.
But as you were talking, I was just like, unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable.
That's often how it goes.
Yeah, it is. It's everyday life. And if you are paying attention and you stay aware, the more you stay aware, the more you recognize that this is happening. And then actually retrospectively, it had been happening all along. It's just paying attention to those things that come along and those signs.
Yeah, it was a game changer.
Yeah, totally agree.
It was a game changer. But again, I think it comes more from the listening. Right? When we listen, our soul knows the best path to get us where we want to be. Our soul also knows how to satisfy those deeper desires, the ones that, you know, you may have some ideas about how your life is supposed to go, but your soul knows so much more. And so when we agree to listen to our intuition and we agree to get out of the way a little bit, things develop and manifest very quickly. And they also are just much more aligned with those deeper longings. And those deeper longings, when they're satisfied, tend to be a lot more satisfying, right, than the ones that our ego wants. I think that that's part of what that trip awakened for all of us. But it's just part of life.
Your message that it doesn't have to be something big and massive, that just pay attention to the everyday stuff and it all builds.
Amen.
I really want to thank you for being on the show and sharing your energy and love that you're putting out to everyone. I have two more questions. Number one, if you could just go over again how people can get a hold of you and what you offer for them. And the other is any message or last words that you would like to leave for the listeners out there.
All right, we'll do the housekeeping first, and then I'll tune in and see what I get from the guides to share with everyone. Yeah, lots of ways to play with me and find me. Come check out a retreat at Cactus Blossom Retreat. Again, that's cactusblossomretreat.com. You can sign up for an intuitive reading or intuitive counseling session over at my other business, Victoria Shaw Intuitive Counseling. You can sign up for a class. We have a self-paced intuition development class on there. We have a class about past lives and connecting with your spirit guide. So there's some self-paced stuff, but I also teach widely online throughout the year. And I think my next big class is coming up. I want to say January 25th, 2023. And it's all called Awakening the Magic in You, which is also our motto at Cactus Blossom. So those two things kind of line up. So that's going to be a really fun class. Let's see what else. You can listen to my podcast, which is Intuitive Connection and is available on all the major podcast platforms. And if you're on social media, I'm there too. And I play the most on Facebook. I have a Facebook group, Intuitive Connection Community, and I do some teachings in there too. And periodically we do come and do some live readings, which are always super duper popular. That's another way to play with me and see how I work. And I think I covered everything. So let me tune into the other part of your question. Is there anything else? And just kind of tune in. Ooh. And I don't usually channel entities or beings or gods or goddesses. I usually just tune into my guides, and my guides are sort of amorphous. But today we have a special visitor, and that is our beautiful goddess Isis, who did speak to me very, very clearly when we were at her temple in Aswan. And so, yeah, I just want to tune into her energy. Right now, I just want to enjoy her energy because she's so beautiful. But she's speaking to the two of us. We'll grab some of our other friends too from our trip, because I see Sony and Ramona, who are both mentioned today too. And they just want to know, she wants us to know, us, and also many of you listeners, that we're all part of this beautiful wave that is, and she's showing me the image of a beautiful glittering wave. So it's like a wave of water, but it has like gold fairy dust in it. It's absolutely beautiful. And the word that comes through is illuminating. And she's saying that you're all part of this beautiful wave that's washing through the earth right now. And, really that wave of, and I want to get this from her, but they say, go ahead, transformation. It's a beautiful time for transformation. It's a beautiful time for personal development. It's a beautiful time for psychic development. It's a beautiful time for some internal housekeeping. And it's a beautiful time to use the word that I use at my classes and at my retreat, to really make a concerted effort to, or even get out of the way and allow it to happen, to awaken the magic in you. Because everyone here listening, you're magical. We all have our own unique magic, and we are all here to experience that so deeply, fully, and completely in all aspects of our life. But we're also here to model and to share that magic with the world. So now is your time. And I can see us all virtually like holding hands, all around the earth. I don't know how wide your listenership is, but we'll just go there. And really feel that connection, and feel that you have this connection to all sorts of beings all over the earth that are part of this wave of transformation. And wherever you are in your personal journey, know that you're part of that, and that, it is your birthright to awaken that magic in you.
Oh, thank you for that blissful energy that just came right across. Thank you, Isis.
Thank you.
Well, we are all one. Victoria, I'd like to thank you again for coming on the show. I'd like to take this time to also thank our listeners for taking time out of their day to join us. Until next time, embrace your wild soul. I'd like to thank our guests for joining us for this episode of Wild Souls Gatherings Happy Hour for the Spiritually Curious. To find out more about our guests, how to contact them, or detail on this episode, please see our show notes. You can also visit us at our website, wildsoulsgathering.com. We would love to hear from our visitors what you thought of this show, what you would like to see and hear in the future, questions you may have. Go to podinbox.com/happy hour for the spiritually curious. You can leave either a voice or traditional message for us. This is your host, Dr. Sandra Marie, sending each of you peace and love. Until we meet again, embrace your wild soul.